My name is Adana Mitchell. I am 31 years old, and I direct corporate compliance for a financial firm in Charleston, West Virginia. My job is to find the rot hidden inside clean spreadsheets. Tonight, the rot was wearing a white silk gown. The country club ballroom hummed with the sound of 300 guests. Waiters in black vests moved between the tables carrying silver trays loaded with seared Wagyu steak and roasted asparagus. I sat at table 24, positioned right next to the kitchen's swinging doors. A young waiter stopped at my chair. His hands were shaking as he set a plate down in front of me. It was empty porcelain. Resting in the center was a thick piece of cardstock. 2 words were printed in sharp black ink. Not family. I looked toward the head table. My mother Sylvia caught my eye. Her lips curled into a slow, satisfied smirk before she took a sip of her champagne. Beside her, my sister Jolene hid a laugh behind her expensive, cascading floral bouquet. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to flush, to stand up, to cause a scene, or better yet, to walk out in tears. I did not move. I reached for my water glass and took a slow sip. I am an auditor. I deal in ledgers, not tears. I glanced at the silver watch on my left wrist. It was 8:15. I had paid the audiovisual technician a crisp $1,000 bill before the cocktail hour began. Before I show you what happened when the lights went down, welcome to Grape Vengeance, where we expose the truth that family secrets try to bury. If you have ever been pushed out by the people who were supposed to protect you, you are in the right place. Drop a comment below telling me your age and where you are listening from. You will want to stick around to see what $1,000 buys at a high society wedding. At exactly 8:20, the jazz band stopped playing. The overhead chandeliers dimmed. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone and announced a special father-daughter tribute for the bride. 300 guests turned their chairs toward the 15-foot projection screen descending from the ceiling. My father Richard beamed from his seat. Jolene leaned her head on the shoulder of her new husband, Harrison. Harrison was a good man, from a wealthy family blind to the trap he'd just married into. The screen flickered to life. It did not show childhood photographs. It showed the interior of my own home office. The footage was crisp, captured by a motion-activated security camera hidden on my bookshelf. My mother's voice boomed through the ballroom surround sound system. She cannot prove we forged the signature. Her compliance board will fire her if she makes a fuss. The ballroom went dead silent. Forks clattered onto plates. On the screen, Jolene laughed. She was filing her nails while sitting at my desk. As soon as I marry Harrison, I will just pull the $120,000 from his trust account to pay off the loan. He is too stupid to check the ledgers anyway. The projection screen glowed bright in the dark room. The silence was thick and heavy. Jolene dropped her champagne flute. The crystal shattered against the hardwood floor. Harrison stood up slowly. The color drained from his face as he looked at the woman beside him. He did not yell. He did not wave his arms. He looked at Jolene, then at my mother, and said 5 words. This wedding is officially over. To understand how a family destroys itself in front of 300 people, you have to rewind. 18 months before Harrison walked out of those country club doors, the foundation of the Mitchell household was already cracking. My father Richard owned Mitchell Logistics. It was a regional freight company that had seen better days. He spent his life building a fleet of diesel trucks and negotiating shipping routes across the eastern seaboard. But the market shifted. Fuel prices climbed, contracts dried up. His home office always smelled of stale coffee and impending ruin. Thick stacks of past-due invoices gathered dust on his oak desk. My mother Sylvia lived in an entirely different reality. She treated Charleston high society like a competitive sport. Her entire existence revolved around country club memberships, charity luncheons, and maintaining the illusion of generational wealth. She preferred to ignore the collection notices. If the mail brought bad news, she simply threw the envelopes into a desk drawer and closed it. Out of sight meant out of mind. In that house, I was the utility child. I was the human shock absorber. If a pipe burst, I called the plumber. If the internet went down, I reset the router. I was expected to fix the problems nobody else wanted to touch, but I was never celebrated for the solution. My value was strictly operational. My sister Jolene was the golden child. The hierarchy was established early and enforced daily. When Jolene turned 16, my parents presented her with the keys to a brand new convertible with a red ribbon tied around the steering wheel. She cried tears of joy, and my mother filmed the entire spectacle. That same year, I worked overnight shifts at a local diner. I wiped down sticky tables and poured cheap coffee for truck drivers just to pay for my college textbooks. I would finish a 12-hour shift, smell like grease and bleach, and sit in the back of my accounting classes, trying to keep my eyes open. I learned early that tears do not pay tuition. Numbers do. Hard work offers a tangible return. That disparity shaped my entire identity. It turned me into an auditor long before I ever earned my corporate compliance title. I learned to view human behavior through a cold, clinical lens of risk assessment. I stopped expecting love and started calculating liabilities. I mapped out the emotional deficits in my own home the same way I would map out a fraudulent corporate ledger. The true depth of their delusion revealed itself during Thanksgiving dinner 18 months ago. Sylvia had spent 2 days preparing the dining room. She polished the silver until it gleamed and arranged an elaborate centerpiece of autumn flowers. She invited our extended family. Aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the chairs. Everyone wore their Sunday best. I wore a simple gray blazer because I had just come straight from the office, where I spent the holiday weekend finalizing a quarterly audit. I sat near the end of the long table. The conversation hummed around me. Jolene sat at the center of attention, wearing a silk dress she charged to my father's credit card. She spent 20 minutes telling our relatives about her grueling schedule of wedding dress fittings and cake stings. Harrison sat beside her, nodding politely, completely unaware of the financial rot hiding behind her bright smile. My father sat at the head of the table. He looked pale. The skin around his eyes was tight, and his breathing sounded shallow. His health had been deteriorating for months. The stress of the failing logistics company was taking a heavy toll on his heart. He suffered from severe angina. He reached for his water glass, and his hand trembled, spilling a few drops onto the crisp, white tablecloth. He tapped his knife against his glass. The room quieted down. Relatives turned their attention toward the head of the table. My father cleared his throat and offered a strained smile. "I want to take a moment to say how thankful I am for this family," he said. His voice sounded thin, but specifically, I want to raise a glass to Jolene. Jolene feigned a look of modest surprise. She placed a hand over her heart, playing the role of the humble daughter. "This year has been tough on the business," my father continued. "Things have been tight, but Jolene really stepped up. She spent all week helping her mother manage the household budget. She reorganized the grocery lists. She found ways to cut corners so we could afford this beautiful dinner. She is keeping this family afloat." A murmur of approval rippled down the table. My aunt clapped her hands. Sylvia beamed with pride, looking at her youngest daughter like she had just cured a disease. Jolene smiled and leaned into Harrison, accepting the unearned praise. I sat perfectly still. My hands rested in my lap. Inside the pocket of my gray blazer sat a folded piece of paper. It was a receipt from the Charleston County tax assessor. 3 days earlier, I had gone to the mailbox and intercepted a final notice. My parents had defaulted on their property taxes. The county was preparing to place a lien on the house. The total due was $4,500. My father did not have the cash. Sylvia refused to acknowledge the debt when I showed her the letter. She told me it was a clerical error and walked away. I did not argue with them. I did not yell. I simply logged into my personal savings account, withdrew the funds, and drove to the county courthouse to pay the balance in full. I saved the estate from a public auction. I preserved the very dining room they were currently sitting in. Now I was sitting at a table watching my sister receive a toast for cutting coupons, while the receipt that actually saved the roof over their heads burned a hole in my pocket. Sylvia looked down the table and caught my eye. She knew exactly what I had done. I saw the knowledge flash in her gaze. It was a cold, calculating look. But instead of acknowledging the truth, she turned back to Jolene and raised her wineglass higher. "To our Savior," Sylvia declared. The family echoed the toast. I did not pick up my glass. I looked at my father. He was rubbing his chest, a subtle grimace crossing his features before he forced his smile back into place. Any normal person would have stood up. A normal daughter would have pulled the tax receipt from her blazer, thrown it onto the center of the polished mahogany table, and demanded recognition. I could have shattered the illusion right there. I could have exposed Jolene for the parasite she was. But I am a compliance director. I analyze the fallout before I make a move. If I expose the truth at that table, the humiliation would fall directly on my father. The extended family would realize his freight company was failing. His pride would break. His heart condition was already unstable. My risk assessment indicated that a public confrontation might literally put him in the hospital. The shock of public failure could trigger a cardiac event. I calculated the emotional deficit. My mother and sister were toxic liabilities. My father was a failing asset, but he was still my father. I chose to tolerate the cruelty out of a misplaced sense of duty to his failing health. I swallowed my pride. I watched Jolene soak up the stolen gratitude. I stayed quiet. That silence was a calculated choice. But in the world of corporate compliance, unchecked behavior always escalates. When you allow a minor fraud to go unpunished, the perpetrators grow bold. They stop fearing the consequences. They start believing their own lies. Sylvia and Jolene looked at my silence, and they did not see a daughter protecting a sick father. They saw a weak target. They saw a quiet bank account that would never demand a return on investment. I excused myself before dessert. I walked into the kitchen and set my napkin on the counter. The house was quiet in the back hallway. I pulled the tax receipt from my pocket and stared at the red ink stamped across the top. Paid in full. I folded the paper and dropped it into the kitchen trash can. The debt was settled. I thought that would be the end of it. I assumed the $4,500 would be enough to hold the wolves at bay. I was wrong. The property tax bill was just a symptom of a much deeper rot. A few weeks after Thanksgiving, my father's cough grew worse. He stopped going into the logistics office. He spent his days sitting in his leather recliner, staring blankly at the television. The business accounts were freezing. The bank notices started arriving in thick envelopes demanding immediate attention. Sylvia continued to host her charity luncheons. She continued to schedule expensive wedding vendors for Jolene. They acted like the sinking ship was a luxury cruise. I kept my distance, focusing on my career. I closed audits, I flagged discrepancies, I built a firewall between my professional life and their suburban delusion. But a firewall only works if the threat remains on the outside. I did not know it yet, but the $4,500 I paid to the county was about to look like spare change. My silence at the Thanksgiving table gave them the exact blueprint they needed for their next maneuver. They realized I would pay out of pocket to protect the family name. They realized I would bleed myself dry to keep my father out of a hospital bed. They were preparing to test the limits of my silent generosity. The logistics company was about to default on a sum that could not be fixed with a simple trip to the county courthouse. The estate was moving toward a full foreclosure, and the only person with the liquid assets to stop it was the daughter they refused to acknowledge. The stage was set for a theft they thought I would never uncover. 4 months after that Thanksgiving dinner, the fragile illusion holding my parents together fractured. The winter brought a brutal freeze to the freight market. My father could no longer hide the bleeding. I drove out to the estate on a Tuesday evening to drop off some paperwork. The driveway was empty. His 2 remaining diesel trucks had been repossessed earlier that afternoon. I walked through the front door and found him sitting in his unlit study. His skin held a terrifying gray pallor. His breathing rattled in his chest. Resting on the center of his mahogany desk was a thick stack of certified letters. I recognized the return address printed on the top envelope. It belonged to the primary commercial lender in Charleston. I did not ask for permission. I reached across the desk and opened the letter. It was a formal notice of intent to foreclose. The logistics company had used the family estate as collateral for a short-term operational loan. The loan had defaulted. The bank was initiating the seizure process in exactly 14 days. The total lien amount was $85,000. My father did not look at me. He stared at the dark window. He whispered that he was going to lose the house. He said the stress was going to kill him before the bank ever changed the locks. I stood in the dim room and ran the numbers in my head. I am an auditor. I view crises through a matrix of risk and reward. The reward was preserving my father's failing heart and keeping a roof over his head. The risk was my own financial stability. I did not offer empty words of comfort. I did not hug him. I simply folded the foreclosure notice, put it in my purse, and walked out the front door. The next morning I sat in my corporate office before the sun came up. The building was empty. The glow of my dual monitors cast a harsh light across my desk. I pulled up my personal financial dashboard. For 7 years I had lived well below my means. I drove a reliable sedan. I skipped expensive vacations. Every spare dollar I earned went into a high-yield investment portfolio. I built that account to secure my independence. I clicked the sell order button. I liquidated $85,000 in blue-chip stocks and municipal bonds. It took 5 seconds to erase years of grueling sacrifice. I knew my mother would never accept a direct bailout from the daughter she treated like a servant. Her pride was far too fragile. She would rather face eviction than admit I held the power to save her. I needed a blind mechanism. I drafted a swift legal entity, naming it the Mitchell Heritage Trust. I routed the liquidated funds through the trust account and wired the money directly to the commercial lender. I cleared the lien, I paid the bank fees, I finalized the transaction, making sure my personal name never appeared on the final payoff certificate. The estate was secure. I expected the issue to fade into quiet relief. I expected my parents to simply accept the anonymous miracle and move forward. That Sunday, Sylvia requested my presence for a family dinner. She called my cell phone and insisted I arrive promptly at 6. Her voice sounded bright. It lacked the strained panic that had defined the previous 4 months. I parked in the driveway and walked up the brick path. The heavy scent of roasted garlic and expensive red wine greeted me at the door. I stepped into the dining room. The atmosphere felt surreal. The grim despair from Tuesday evening was gone. My father sat at the head of the table, wearing a pressed shirt. Color had returned to his cheeks. Sylvia bustled around the kitchen, pouring wine into crystal goblets. Jolene sat next to Harrison, her hand resting delicately on his forearm. I took my usual seat near the kitchen door. The plates were filled, the conversation remained light. We talked about the weather and Harrison's new promotion at his engineering firm. I watched my family eat, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. I had solved the equation. I had stabilized the household. Then Sylvia cleared her throat. She set her silver fork down and picked up a heavy manila folder resting on the sideboard. She walked to the head of the table and placed her hand on my father's shoulder. "We have some wonderful news," she announced. Her eyes swept across the room, landing on everyone, except me. "As you know, the business hit a rough patch. We were facing some very dark days. The bank sent a terrifying letter last week." My father looked down at his plate. The shame was evident in the slope of his shoulders. Sylvia opened the folder. She pulled out the bank payoff confirmation, the exact document I had secured on Wednesday morning. "But we received a blessing," she continued. "Jolene saw how much her father was suffering. She could not bear the thought of us losing this home. So she spoke to Harrison, and Harrison, being the incredible man that he is, reached into his own family trust." I stopped chewing. The room seemed to tilt. Sylvia held the paper up. "Harrison paid the bank she declared. He cleared the $85,000 debt. He saved our family." Jolene blushed. She looked down at her lap, playing the role of the devoted daughter. Harrison blinked. He looked slightly confused. He shifted in his chair and offered a polite, hesitant nod. He was a wealthy man who managed multiple blind trusts for his own estate. He likely assumed his financial manager had authorized a transfer at Jolene's request, without bothering him with the details. Jolene had clearly manipulated the narrative behind closed doors, feeding him just enough half-truths to keep him compliant. My father reached across the table and grasped Harrison's hand. He had tears in his eyes. "Thank you, son," he whispered. "I will pay you back every cent. You have my word." Harrison smiled awkwardly. "You do not need to worry about that, sir. We are family now." I sat frozen in my chair. The $85,000 came from my blood and sweat. It came from the overnight shifts at the diner. It came from the holidays I spent reviewing compliance logs instead of attending parties. I bought that house. Sylvia turned her head and looked directly at me. Her expression was triumphant. She knew the truth. She had to know. The commercial lender required a notarized signature to release the final deed. She had undoubtedly seen the corporate routing numbers and traced them back to my firm. But acknowledging my sacrifice meant acknowledging her own failure. It meant admitting the scapegoat was the only true pillar holding her life together. Instead, she handed the victory to her golden child. She used my money to elevate Jolene's status and secure Harrison's loyalty to the family. I looked at my mother. I looked at the bank confirmation in her hand. The urge to speak rose in my throat. I could stand up. I could pull the wire transfer receipts on my phone. I could show Harrison the exact minute the funds left my account. I could shatter the dinner party and watch Jolene try to explain her lies. But I looked at my father. He was breathing easily for the first time in months. The gray shadow had left his face. He believed his future son-in-law respected him enough to save him. If I exposed the lie, I would destroy his pride in front of the man he desperately wanted to impress. I swallowed the truth. I picked up my wine glass and held it in the air. "To Harrison," I said. My voice was steady and cold. "Thank you for your generosity." Jolene smiled at me. It was a vicious, hollow smile. Sylvia nodded, her eyes flashing with victory. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully dominated the narrative, putting me back in my place as the invisible utility child. I finished my dinner. I helped clear the plates. I drove back to my quiet house and went to sleep. I believed my silence was a shield protecting my father from a fatal shock. I believed the transaction was closed. The house was safe. The debt was zero. I failed to calculate the true depth of a predator's greed. By swallowing the theft of my $85,000, I did not buy peace. I sent a very clear, dangerous signal to Sylvia and Jolene. I proved that I would sacrifice my own future to protect the family secret. I proved that I would endure public humiliation without fighting back. In the eyes of an extortionist, silence is not a virtue. Silence is an invitation. They realized I was a bottomless resource hiding behind a wall of duty. The wedding was approaching, the venue demands were escalating, the floral arrangements and the designer dresses required capital they did not possess. They looked at the clear deed to the estate I had just paid for, and they did not see sanctuary. They saw leverage. They realized the blind trust I used to save them contained my social security number. My silence gave them the keys to my identity. And they were about to use those keys to unlock a nightmare. Spring arrived in West Virginia, bringing a false sense of renewal to the Mitchell household. The freight market remained stagnant, but my father seemed to stabilize. His breathing grew less labored. He spent his mornings reading the newspaper on the back porch, believing his business debts were behind him. He trusted the lie my mother crafted. He thought Harrison had saved his legacy. With the estate secure, Sylvia and Jolene shifted their entire focus toward the wedding. Jolene treated her upcoming marriage like a royal coronation. She refused to settle for a modest ceremony. She booked the grand ballroom at the Charleston Country Club. She hired a specialized event coordinator from out of state. She ordered custom silk table linens and imported floral arches. I watched the deliveries arrive at the house. Caterers dropped off tasting menus featuring seared Wagyu beef and artisanal caviar. I sat in the background and observed the escalating extravagance. Harrison came from money, but his family managed their wealth through structured trusts. He did not hand Jolene a blank check. He provided a generous but fixed budget for the ceremony. Jolene burned through his allotted funds within the first month, just securing the venue deposit and her designer gown. The math did not add up. I knew my parents had zero liquid capital. The logistics company accounts were drained. Yet Sylvia continued writing checks for ice sculptures and a 10-piece jazz band. I assumed Sylvia was opening high-interest credit cards to float the expenses. People obsessed with social status often bury themselves in unsecured debt to maintain appearances. I considered it a foolish choice, but it was their choice. As long as my father had a roof over his head, I decided to stay out of their delusions. I underestimated their sheer predatory nature. Emotional thieves rarely respect boundaries. Once they realize they can steal the credit for your sacrifices, they inevitably come back for your identity. The realization arrived on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my corner office at the financial firm, the Charleston skyline stretched out beyond my window. My desk was covered in compliance reports and risk assessment matrices. I spend my days monitoring corporate accounts for structural anomalies. I utilize specialized software to track unauthorized credit inquiries and verify asset liquidity. Because of my senior position, federal regulations require me to maintain pristine personal credit. A compliance director cannot hold unverified debt. My firm installed an automated monitoring matrix on my personal Social Security number to ensure my financial standing remains uncompromised. At 10:15, my secure terminal chimed. A red notification banner appeared across my primary monitor. It was a critical alert from the Credit Monitoring Bureau. I set my coffee mug down. I opened the notification, expecting to see a minor clerical error or a delayed report from a standard utility bill. The screen displayed a hard inquiry. Someone had executed a top-tier credit check using my credentials. The inquiry originated from a regional mortgage lender located right here in Charleston. My pulse slowed. A cold, familiar clarity settled into my chest. This was not a mistake. A mortgage lender does not perform a hard pull unless a major financial instrument is being processed. I locked my office door. I bypassed the standard consumer credit portals and logged directly into the county clerk database. I entered my secure credentials and accessed the municipal property records. I typed in the address for the Mitchell family estate. The search engine processed the request. A list of recorded deeds populated on the screen. The top document was dated 3 days ago. I clicked the digital file. The scanned paperwork loaded. It was a recorded deed of trust for a home equity line of credit. A HELOC. I read the numbers printed in sharp black ink. $120,000. Someone had leveraged the equity in my father's property to extract a 6-figure cash loan. But my father could never qualify for that amount. His credit score was destroyed by the failing logistics company. Sylvia had no income to report. They were financially radioactive. I scrolled down to the authorization section of the document. The borrower listed on the loan was not Richard Mitchell. It was the Mitchell Heritage Trust, the exact legal entity I created 4 months earlier to anonymously pay off their foreclosure. I stared at the screen. The glowing pixels burned the truth into my retinas. When I established that blind trust to save the house I named myself as the sole guarantor, I linked my personal Social Security number to the trust documents to satisfy the federal banking regulations. I had printed a physical copy of the formation paperwork and placed it inside a locked filing cabinet in my father's study, alongside the original property deed. Sylvia must have found the key. She opened the cabinet to retrieve the clean property deed. She found the trust paperwork resting right next to it. She looked at the documents and discovered that her invisible utility child was the actual owner of the Mitchell Heritage Trust. She saw my Social Security number. She saw my digital authorization codes. She did not feel guilt for stealing the credit at that Sunday dinner. She saw an opportunity. I kept scrolling down the digital loan file. My hands felt like ice. I reached the signature block on the final page. There, resting on the bottom line, was my name. It was not a physical signature. It was a verified digital stamp. Sylvia and Jolene had used my stolen personal data to bypass the physical notary requirements. They submitted the HELOC application online, pretending to be me. They pledged the newly paid-off estate as collateral. Because my personal credit score was flawless and the house was free of all previous liens, the regional lender approved the application in record time. They secured $120,000 in raw liquid cash. I opened a secondary tracking program on my terminal. I needed to see where the money went. I pulled the wire routing information attached to the loan disbursement. The funds did not go into the logistics company operating account. The money was not used to secure my father's retirement or pay for his heart medication. The entire sum was wired directly to the Charleston Country Club Event Management Division. The air in my office felt thin. I leaned back in my leather chair. The sheer audacity of the crime rewired my understanding of my own family. They did not just demand a luxury wedding. They committed felony identity theft and federal wire fraud to pay for it. They used my clean name to extract the equity I had just purchased for them. They handed the money to a country club for champagne and floral arrangements, leaving me legally bound to the debt. If that loan defaulted, the regional lender would not go after my parents. The bank would come after me. The debt would destroy my credit matrix. The moment my employer discovered a fraudulent 6-figure liability attached to my profile, my corporate compliance license would be revoked. I would lose my job. I would lose my career. I could face criminal charges for banking fraud because the digital signature pointed directly to my credentials. Sylvia and Jolene were willing to send me to a federal penitentiary just so Jolene could wear a designer gown and impress a ballroom full of strangers. The era of the silent daughter ended right there in that corner office. I did not cry. I did not throw anything across the room. I methodically hit the print command on my keyboard. The laser printer hummed, spitting out crisp, warm pages of evidence. I gathered the recorded deed, the forged signature block, and the country club wire transfer receipt. I placed the documents into a thick manila envelope. I locked my terminal. I walked out of the financial firm and rode the elevator down to the parking garage. I climbed into my sedan and started the engine. I merged onto the highway heading straight toward the estate. I knew exactly what I was walking into. I knew confronting apex predators required absolute emotional detachment. They would lie. They would deflect. They would try to make me feel guilty for ruining the wedding preparations. I gripped the steering wheel, watching the road ahead. The $4,500 tax bill was a test. The $85,000 foreclosure payoff was a mistake. But the $120,000 identity theft was a declaration of war. I pulled into the driveway of the estate. Sylvia's luxury SUV was parked near the front door. The caterers were gone. The house was quiet. I turned off the ignition and picked up the manila envelope from the passenger seat. I walked up the brick steps and placed my hand on the brass door handle. I was ready to deliver the ultimatum. I expected them to crumble when faced with the printed evidence of their federal crimes. I failed to anticipate the weapon they had waiting for me on the other side of that door. I turned the brass knob and pushed the front door open. The house was quiet, except for the low murmur of voices coming from the kitchen. I walked down the hallway, keeping my footsteps light. The scent of expensive vanilla candles filled the air. Sylvia and Jolene sat side by side at the large granite island. They were drinking sparkling water and examining a thick binder of imported floral arrangements. I stepped into the room. Neither of them looked up. They were debating the merits of white orchids versus traditional roses. I reached into the manila envelope. I did not announce my presence. I simply pulled out the recorded deed of trust and dropped it directly onto the open floral binder. I followed it with the forged signature block. Finally, I placed the country club wire transfer receipt on top of the pile. The papers landed with a sharp slap against the granite. Jolene jumped, spilling a few drops of water onto the counter. Sylvia froze. She looked at the documents resting over her orchids. She did not gasp. Her hands did not tremble. She simply reached into her pocket, pulled out her reading glasses, and slid them onto the bridge of her nose. She reviewed the paperwork with the calm detachment of a librarian reading a checkout slip. "You forged my digital signature," I said. My voice was flat and steady. "You used my social security number to extract a six-figure loan against the house I just paid off. You wired $120,000 to a country club. That is federal wire fraud and felony identity theft." I expected denial. I expected tears. I prepared myself for the standard deflection where Sylvia would claim she did it to save the family face or that she intended to pay me back. Instead, Sylvia took off her glasses and folded the earpieces together. She looked up at me. Her expression was terrifyingly serene. "You set up the blind trust, Adana," she replied. Her tone was conversational. "You created the financial vehicle. You placed your own credentials on the master file. We simply utilized the available resources to ensure your sister has the day she deserves." I stared at her. The utter lack of remorse was breathtaking. "You stole my identity," I repeated. "You attached a six-figure liability to my name. If that loan defaults, the bank comes after my assets." Sylvia smiled. It was a thin, chilling curve of her lips. She placed her hands flat on the granite counter and leaned forward. "Then you better make sure the loan never defaults," she said. I narrowed my eyes. "What are you talking about?" Sylvia tilted her head, studying me the way a hunter studies a trapped animal. "You hold a very prestigious position in this city, Adana. You are the senior director of corporate compliance. Your entire career is built on the foundation of an unblemished ethical record. Your firm trusts you to manage multi-million-dollar accounts because your personal credit and your moral standing are spotless." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "What do you think happens if I make a phone call tomorrow morning?" Sylvia asked. "What happens if I contact your federal licensing board and file a formal whistleblower complaint?" The air in the kitchen grew heavy. I watched her eyes. They were cold and calculating. "I will tell them the truth," Sylvia continued. From a certain perspective, of course. I will tell them my brilliant daughter used her advanced financial knowledge to set up a secretive blind trust. I will say you manipulated your sick father into signing away his equity. I will tell the board you orchestrated this entire home equity loan yourself to embezzle money from your own elderly parents. You have no proof of that, I stated. The digital footprint will show the application was filed from this house. Sylvia waved her hand, dismissing the technicality. Proof does not matter in your industry, Adana. The accusation is all it takes. The moment I file that complaint, your compliance board will flag your license. Your firm will suspend you immediately, pending a lengthy internal investigation. The scandal will leak. No financial institution in this country will ever hire you again. Your career will be dead before the bank ever opens a formal inquiry. The architecture of her blackmail was flawless. She understood my vulnerability perfectly. In the banking sector, reputation is currency. An executive accused of defrauding her own family becomes an instant liability. Even if I eventually cleared my name, the stain of the investigation would remain permanent. My employers would never trust me with another portfolio. Sylvia had constructed a checkmate. She committed the crime, but she was holding my livelihood hostage to guarantee my silence. Jolene picked up her glass of sparkling water and took a delicate sip. She looked at me with an expression of profound boredom. "Just set up an auto-pay, Adana," she said. Her voice dripped with entitlement. "It is only a few $100s a month to cover the interest. You make plenty of money at that firm. Just pay the monthly premium and consider it my wedding gift. We can forget this whole ugly conversation ever happened." I looked at my sister. She was wearing a diamond engagement ring and sitting in a house I paid for, telling me to finance her luxury lifestyle under the threat of professional ruin. She viewed me as a human teller machine, an appliance programmed to dispense cash whenever she pressed the right buttons. In that exact moment, something fundamental shifted inside my chest. The last lingering thread of daughterly obligation snapped. For 31 years, I had tried to earn my place at their table. I paid their property taxes. I cured their foreclosure. I absorbed their insults and their neglect because I believed blood required loyalty. I thought they were just flawed people struggling with pride and bad luck. Standing in that kitchen, I realized the truth. They were not struggling. They were predators. They were parasites feeding on my sense of duty. Emotional reasoning was entirely useless here. You do not negotiate with a parasite. You do not ask a predator for empathy. You study their habits, you map their weaknesses, and then you eradicate them. I stopped looking at them as my mother and my sister. I began viewing them as hostile corporate entities. They were high-risk liabilities requiring immediate liquidation. They thought they held the ultimate leverage. They believed the threat to my career would force me into permanent submission. But they made a critical error in their risk assessment. They assumed I would play defense. They assumed I would scramble to protect my job by burying their secret. They forgot that I am a compliance auditor. I do not run from investigations. I build them. I did not yell. I did not slam my fist against the counter or deliver a tearful speech about fairness. Outrage is a tool for the powerless, and I was no longer powerless. I reached out and gathered the printed documents from the granite island. I tapped the edges against the stone to align the pages perfectly. I slid the paperwork back into the manila envelope and tucked it under my arm. "I hope the orchids are worth it," I said. My voice was steady and devoid of all warmth. Sylvia watched me carefully. She expected me to argue. My calm demeanor unsettled her, but she quickly masked her hesitation with another smug smile. She thought my retreat signaled my surrender. "Close the door behind you on your way out," Sylvia said, turning her attention back to the floral binder. I walked down the hallway and exited the house. The spring air felt crisp against my face. I climbed into my sedan and locked the doors. I did not drive away immediately. I sat behind the steering wheel and let the cold, ruthless logic of my profession take full control of my mind. Sylvia was correct about one thing. A verbal accusation was a dangerous weapon. If it came down to my word against hers, the compliance board would pause my credentials. I could not go to the authorities with just a forged signature. She would spin the narrative and cast herself as the elderly victim of a greedy corporate daughter. To bypass her blackmail, I needed something undeniable. I needed a confession. I needed physical evidence that could not be twisted, reinterpreted, or denied in a court of law. I needed to capture them in their own element, boasting about their crimes. They believed I was a weak target because I had always operated in the shadows, fixing their mistakes without seeking credit. Now I was going to use those shadows against them. I pulled my phone from my purse and opened my calendar. I had a mandatory regional banking conference scheduled in Charlotte next week. I would be out of state for 3 days. It was the perfect window of opportunity. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway. I was not driving back to my office. I was heading to a specialty electronics store on the edge of the city. I needed to purchase some specific equipment. Sylvia and Jolene thought they had trapped me in a corner. They did not realize I was already drafting the blueprints for a cage of my own. I was going to invite them inside, and they were going to lock the door themselves. I drove straight to a specialty electronics retailer on the outskirts of Charleston. I walked past the televisions and the commercial audio displays, heading directly for the home security aisle. I am an auditor. I understand that physical evidence requires a flawless chain of custody. If I brought an illegal recording to my compliance board, they would throw it out and suspend me for violating privacy statutes. But I knew the law. In my state, a homeowner holds the legal right to monitor their own private domicile. Anyone who enters my property forfeits their expectation of privacy the moment they cross the threshold. I purchased 3 motion-activated security cameras. These were not cheap plastic toys. They were high-end devices, featuring crystal-clear, high-definition recording and advanced audio sensors designed to pick up whispers across a crowded room. I returned to my quiet house and began the installation. I placed the first camera on top of the living room bookshelf, hiding the lens behind a stack of hardback novels. I mounted the second camera inside my home office, angling it downward to capture a full view of my mahogany desk and the filing cabinets. I positioned the third device near the kitchen island. I connected all 3 units to a secure, encrypted cloud server. I tested the audio feed on my phone. The playback was sharp enough to capture the sound of my own breathing. The stage was set. Now I needed the bait. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother. She answered on the 4th ring. Her voice carried the crisp, arrogant tone of a woman who believed she held all the winning cards. She expected me to beg. She expected me to negotiate a payment plan for the fraudulent loan she took out in my name. I gave her exactly what she wanted. I softened my voice. I injected a slight tremor into my words, playing the role of a defeated daughter. I have a mandatory corporate banking conference in Charlotte, I said. I leave tomorrow morning, and I will be gone for 3 days. Sylvia offered a dry hum of acknowledgement. She did not care about my career, unless she could weaponize it. I hate to ask you for a favor, I continued, allowing my tone to sound hesitant. But my cat Barnaby needs to be fed. Could you and Jolene stop by the house while I am out of town? The spare key is still hidden under the ceramic pot on the front porch. The silence on the other end of the line was thick with quiet triumph. Sylvia interpreted my request as a white flag. Asking her for a favor meant I was backing down. It meant the blackmail worked. "Of course, Adana," she replied. Her voice dripped with fake maternal warmth. "Jolene and I would be happy to check on things. Have a safe trip." I hung up the phone. The trap was primed. The next morning, I packed a small suitcase and drove to the airport. I boarded a short flight to Charlotte. I checked into a generic business hotel near the convention center. I attended the opening seminars, taking meticulous notes on corporate risk management and federal regulatory updates. I sat through presentations on asset forfeiture and fraud prevention. The irony was profound. I was sitting in a room full of federal compliance officers while my mother and sister prepared to burglarize my home. I returned to my hotel room at 6 in the evening. I ordered a simple room service dinner and opened my laptop. I set my phone on the desk beside my water glass. At 7:15, the screen on my phone illuminated. A bright red notification banner flashed across the display. Motion detected in the living room. My pulse remained steady. I tapped the notification, and the encrypted application launched. The live video feed buffered for a fraction of a second before filling my screen with sharp, high-definition color. The front door of my house swung inward. Sylvia stepped into the foyer, carrying a designer leather handbag. Jolene followed close behind, holding a cup of expensive iced coffee. They did not call out for the cat. They did not walk toward the kitchen where Barnaby kept his food bowl. They bypassed the living room entirely and walked straight down the hallway toward my private home office. I switched the camera feed. The office lens captured them perfectly. Sylvia did not hesitate. She walked around my desk and began opening the heavy wooden drawers. Jolene leaned against the doorframe, watching her mother rifle through my personal tax returns and bank statements. The audio feed kicked in. The microphone picked up the rustle of paper and the clink of ice cubes in Jolene's cup. "Are you sure she will just pay the premium?" Jolene asked. Her tone was careless. Sylvia scoffed, pulling a folder from the bottom drawer. "She has no choice. I saw the look on her face when I mentioned the compliance board. Idana is terrified of losing her precious job. She will cover the monthly payments just to keep us quiet." I watched the screen. The confession was flawless. Sylvia had just admitted to the extortion on a recorded server, but I needed them to acknowledge the original crime. I needed them to explicitly name the forged loan. Jolene took a sip of her coffee. It was still so easy, she laughed. I cannot believe the regional lender approved the application that fast. Using her social security number was brilliant. "The digital stamp did all the work," Sylvia replied, closing the drawer and moving to the filing cabinet. "They see a pristine credit score and a clear property deed, and they rubber stamp the approval. $120,000 wired directly to the venue. The country club is paid in full. You get your dream wedding, and your sister gets to foot the bill." I pressed the capture button on my keyboard, securing the video file to a separate hard drive. I had the smoking gun. The evidence was irrefutable. I could hand this recording to the district attorney tomorrow and watch them both face felony indictments. But as I watched the live feed, the conversation shifted. A new detail emerged, pulling the rug out from under my initial risk assessment. Jolene set her coffee cup on my bookshelf. She examined her fresh manicure under the office light. "I still think it is risky keeping that debt in her name," Jolene murmured. "Idana is stubborn. What if she stops paying the premium after a few months? The bank will foreclose on the estate anyway." Sylvia paused, her hands resting on a stack of client folders. She looked at her youngest daughter. "We are not relying on your sister forever," Sylvia stated. Her voice grew sharp. "The loan is just a temporary bridge. It gets us through the wedding day. Once you have the marriage certificate in hand, we execute the second phase." I leaned closer to my laptop screen. Jolene nodded, a sly smile spreading across her face. "Harrison is so trusting," she giggled. "He never reviews the paperwork his wealth managers send him. Once we are legally married, his family trust opens up to me. I will just draft a withdrawal request to cover the $120,000. He signs whatever I put in front of him. We pay off the estate loan using his money, and Idana is officially off the hook." Sylvia smiled, a look of genuine pride crossing her features. "His family will never even notice the missing capital. And you walk away with a clean slate." My breath caught in my throat. The sheer scale of their predatory ambition washed over me. They were not just scamming me. They were using my stolen identity to float a temporary loan with the explicit intent of embezzling the payoff funds from Harrison. They were planning to steal from a wealthy, prominent family the moment the wedding vows were finalized. Harrison was not just a naive groom. He was their ultimate mark. They were setting him up to absorb a six-figure theft under the guise of marital asset sharing. If they executed that plan, the legal fallout would be catastrophic. Harrison possessed aggressive family lawyers. When those lawyers eventually audited his trust and discovered the missing funds, they would trace the wire transfer directly back to the loan held in my name. The trail of stolen money would connect Harrison's drained account to my forged signature. I would look like the mastermind. The authorities would assume the corporate compliance director used her sister to infiltrate a wealthy family and extract their capital. The blackmail threat was no longer my primary concern. If I let this wedding proceed, I would become an unwitting accomplice to grand larceny. I watched Sylvia and Jolene exit my office on the video feed. They walked out the front door without ever looking for the cat. I closed the application. I sat in the sterile hotel room listening to the hum of the air conditioner. The stakes had just multiplied. Handing this video to the police would stop the immediate fraud, but it would also trigger a massive public scandal that could still drag my name through the mud. I needed a surgical strike. I needed to deploy this evidence in a way that severed my liability, protected Harrison, and destroyed their social facade in a single, calculated move. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Friday evening. The wedding would follow on Saturday. 300 of the most influential people in Charleston would be gathered in one room. I opened a blank document on my laptop and began drafting a precise operational timeline. The time for silent endurance was over. I was going to attend that wedding, and I was going to bring a gift they would never forget. The rehearsal dinner took place at the Charleston Country Club. The venue featured vaulted ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the golf course. I handed my keys to the valet and walked into the private dining suite. I had just returned from Charlotte. The metal casing of the encrypted flash drive rested in the inside pocket of my tailored blazer. It weighed less than an ounce, but it held enough destructive force to level my family. The room hummed with polite conversation. Harrison came from a long line of structural engineers. His parents, William and Patricia, stood near the center of the room. They wore tailored wool and understated jewelry. They exuded a quiet, generational stability. They had no idea they were breaking bread with thieves who planned to drain their accounts by Monday morning. I stepped onto the carpet. Sylvia intercepted me before I could reach the bar. She wore a deep emerald dress and a practiced smile. Her eyes darted toward my blazer, searching for any sign of defeat. She assumed I spent the last 3 days crying in a hotel room, terrified of her compliance board threat. "You made it," Sylvia whispered. Her voice carried a sickly sweet tone. "I was worried your flight might get delayed." "I am always on time," I replied. Sylvia reached out and patted my arm. The gesture looked maternal to the casual observer, but her fingernails dug into my fabric. "We rearranged the seating chart," she said. "William and Patricia need to sit near the front. The head table is full, you understand." She pointed toward the back of the room. I followed her gaze. Table number 9 sat wedged against the swinging doors of the catering kitchen. It was flanked by a loud ice machine and a stack of spare chairs. My name card rested next to a folded napkin. It was a calculated physical isolation. Sylvia wanted to remind me of my place. She wanted to ensure I stayed far away from Harrison and his parents. A utility child belongs near the service entrance. I did not argue. I did not glare at her. I gave a single curt nod and walked to table 9. I pulled out the chair. The hinges squeaked. I sat down facing the room. Every time a waiter pushed through the kitchen doors, a blast of hot air and the smell of dish soap hit the back of my neck. I embraced the discomfort. The terrible seating arrangement provided the exact tactical advantage I required. Dinner commenced. The country club staff served plates of roasted chicken and wild rice. I ate in silence, watching the performance unfold at the head table. Jolene sat next to Harrison, her hand resting on his knee. She laughed at every joke his father told. My father, Richard, sat on the opposite side, looking tired but genuinely happy. He still believed the illusion. When the dessert plates arrived, the room quieted down. The best man offered a brief speech, then Jolene stood up. She tapped a silver spoon against her crystal water goblet. The guests turned their attention to the bride. Jolene smoothed the front of her designer dress. She looked around the room, locking eyes with William and Patricia. I want to thank Harrison's wonderful parents for welcoming me into their lives, Jolene began. Her voice trembled with manufactured emotion. And I want to thank my own parents. She turned toward Richard and Sylvia. Growing up, we did not always have the easiest path, Jolene said, wiping a dry eye. But my parents taught me the value of hard work. They taught me that clean, honest wealth is the only kind worth having. They sacrificed everything to give me this beautiful life. They are my heroes. The guests offered a warm round of applause. William nodded in approval. Patricia dabbed her eye with a napkin. I sat by the kitchen doors and took a sip of my ice water. Clean, honest wealth. The phrase hung in the air, dripping with irony. She was standing in a room paid for by my stolen Social Security number, wearing a dress financed by federal wire fraud, praising parents who planned to embezzle a six-figure sum from the groom's trust fund. Jolene raised her glass to Harrison. She thanked the bridesmaids. She thanked the event coordinator. She listed a dozen names. She did not mention me. She looked right past table 9, rendering me entirely invisible. The room clapped again. The formal portion of the evening concluded. The guests stood up from their chairs and began to mingle. The waiters cleared the dessert plates. Sylvia immediately cornered Patricia, steering her toward the outdoor patio for a private conversation. Jolene grabbed Harrison by the hand and pulled him toward the photographer. The attention of the room fractured. Nobody was watching the quiet daughter sitting near the service entrance. I stood up. I pushed my squeaking chair back under the table. I did not walk toward the bar or the patio. I turned around and pushed through the swinging kitchen doors. The catering staff ignored me. They were busy loading dirty plates into industrial dishwashers. I walked past the prep stations and exited through the rear service corridor. The country club operated like a theater. The grand ballroom was the stage, but the real power resided behind the curtain. I followed the hallway toward the audio-visual control room. I had visited the club 2 days before my Charlotte trip, under the guise of confirming the seating chart. I spent that visit mapping the layout. I also identified the lead technician managing the wedding production. His name was Tyler. He was a local college student studying sound engineering. He worked long hours for low pay to cover his tuition. He was pragmatic, hungry for cash, and entirely detached from Charleston high society. I vetted him thoroughly. He held no loyalty to Sylvia or Jolene. I knocked twice on the heavy metal door. A voice told me to enter. I opened the door and stepped into the small, windowless room. The space smelled of ozone and hot electronics. Racks of servers and soundboards lined the walls. Tyler sat in a rolling chair, staring at a bank of glowing monitors, displaying the empty grand ballroom where tomorrow's reception would take place. He spun his chair around. He looked surprised to see a guest standing in his control booth. "Can I help you?" he asked. I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer. I pulled out a thick white envelope. I laid it flat on the edge of his soundboard. "I need to hire you for a private contract," I said. Tyler frowned. He looked at the envelope. He did not reach for it. "My shift covers the whole weekend, ma'am. Your family already paid the venue fee." "This is not a venue fee," I replied. "This is a direct payment for precise execution." I tapped the envelope with my index finger. Tyler hesitated. Then he reached out and flicked the flap open. 10 crisp $100 bills rested inside. $1,000. It was more than he made in 2 weeks of running cables. His eyes widened. He looked up at me, the confusion fading into sharp attention. "What do you need me to do?" I pulled the encrypted flash drive from my pocket. I set the silver metal casing next to the cash. "Tomorrow night, during the reception, there is a scheduled father-daughter tribute," I explained. My voice remained low and steady. My mother provided a slideshow of baby pictures on a separate drive. "I have it queued up." Tyler nodded, pointing to his monitor. "You are going to ignore that drive," I said. "When the master of ceremonies announces the tribute, the lights will dim. You will count to 3. Then you will override the main feed. You will play the video file loaded on this silver drive. The file is labeled Audit." Tyler looked at the silver drive. He picked it up, turning it over in his hand. "What is on this?" "That is none of your concern," I stated. "Your job is to push play, ensure the audio is routed through the primary surround sound speakers. Do not mute the track, do not pause the video. You let it run from start to finish. Once the video ends, you will cut the feed to black and turn the house lights up." Tyler swallowed hard. He looked at the $1,000. He knew this was a sabotage mission. He knew playing an unauthorized file during a luxury wedding would cause chaos. But he also knew the country club paid minimum wage. "If I do this, the event manager might fire me," Tyler said. I looked him in the eye. "You are an independent contractor. If they fire you, this $1,000 covers your lost wages. If they ask questions, you tell them the bride's sister handed you a drive and ordered you to play it. You pass the blame directly to me. You take 0 liability." Tyler looked at the cash again. He picked up the envelope and slipped it into his back pocket. He plugged the silver drive into his secondary port. A file folder popped up on his screen. He verified the file named Audit. "I will cut the main feed on 3, he confirmed. I gave a single nod. I turned around and walked out of the control room. I navigated back through the service corridor. I pushed through the kitchen doors and stepped back into the dining room. The rehearsal dinner was winding down. The guests were gathering their coats. Sylvia was laughing loudly near the exit. Harrison and Jolene were walking out, hand in hand. No one noticed my absence. No one asked where I had gone. They treated me like a ghost. I walked to my sedan and drove home. I locked my front door and stood in the dark hallway. Tomorrow the country club would fill with 300 guests. Tomorrow my family would attempt to finalize their theft. I went to my closet and pulled out a sharp, tailored black suit. I brushed the fabric. I prepared my armor. I was ready to attend a wedding, but a new challenge awaited me at table 24. The trap was set in the AV room, but Sylvia had one final maneuver planned to break my spirit before the sun went down. She was preparing a public execution that would push the limits of my endurance and force me to face the ultimate disrespect. Saturday arrived with a bright, unforgiving sun. I drove my sedan up the winding asphalt path of the Charleston Country Club. The exterior columns of the grand clubhouse were wrapped in thousands of imported white lilies. The floral scent hung heavy in the warm air. I looked at those flowers and did not see a celebration of love. I saw a federal crime in plain sight. I saw the fraudulent credit line drawn against my name, paying for every single petal. I handed my keys to the valet and stepped onto the marble walkway. The bridal party had been instructed to wear soft pastel hues. Blush pinks, pale blues, and muted gold dominated the landscape. I rejected the color scheme. I wore a sharp-tailored charcoal suit. The dark wool cut a severe silhouette against the sea of soft chiffon. I was not attending a union. I was walking into a hostile corporate audit, and I dressed for the occasion. I entered the grand ballroom. The space was transformed into a staggering display of unearned luxury. 3 towering crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over 30 round tables draped in imported silk. Waiters circulated with silver trays, offering premium champagne and artisanal hors d'oeuvres. 300 guests filled the room. The local elite of Charleston mingled effortlessly with Harrison's engineering colleagues and his wealthy extended family. I bypassed the greeting line and found my assigned seat. Table 24. Sylvia had positioned me even worse than the rehearsal dinner. My small, round table sat wedged between the kitchen exit doors and a tall speaker array. It was the darkest corner of the room. She wanted me marginalized. She needed me physically minimized to maintain her illusion of total control. I took my chair and watched the performance unfold. My father, Richard, stood near the bar, wearing a rented tuxedo. He smiled and shook hands. He looked healthier than he had in months. He remained entirely oblivious to the fact that his wife and youngest daughter had turned his home equity into a ticking time bomb. He thought Harrison had saved him. He thought this opulent party was a gift from a generous son-in-law. I sat in the shadows and ran the numbers in my head. Every detail in that room represented a specific felony. The 10-piece jazz band warming up on the stage cost $8,000. The custom ice sculpture melting near the raw bar cost $1,200. The silk table runners alone amounted to a month of my salary. I calculated the exact cost of their deceit while watching Sylvia operate the room. My mother wore a sapphire gown. She held a champagne flute and greeted Harrison's relatives with practiced grace. She played the role of the established matriarch flawlessly. She projected an aura of generational stability while hiding a 6-figure identity theft. Jolene sat at the elevated head table looking radiant in her designer dress. Harrison sat beside her, gazing at his new wife with genuine adoration. He thought he was marrying a humble woman who valued honest work. He did not know she planned to drain his trust fund before the ink on their marriage certificate dried. The jazz band transitioned into soft background music. The venue coordinator signaled the start of the dinner service. A small army of waiters emerged from the swinging kitchen doors. They moved with precise choreography. They placed steaming plates of seared Wagyu beef and roasted seasonal vegetables in front of the guests. The ballroom filled with the clinking of silver cutlery and the low murmur of satisfied diners. I remained seated at table 24, watching the food arrive at the surrounding chairs. A young waiter approached my section. He looked no older than 20. His hands shook slightly as he gripped the edge of his silver tray. He served the other 3 guests at my small table, setting down the rich cuts of beef. Then he turned to me. He did not hold a plate of hot food. He reached onto his tray and lowered a pristine, empty white porcelain dish. He set it gently on the silk tablecloth directly in front of me. He did not pour wine into my glass. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor, avoiding my gaze entirely. Resting squarely in the center of the empty white porcelain was a thick piece of premium cardstock. The paper featured the same elegant cursive font used for the wedding invitations. 2 words were printed in stark black ink: "Not family." The young waiter backed away quickly, retreating through the kitchen doors. The guests seated at my table stopped eating. They stared at the empty plate and the harsh message. The conversation around table 24 died instantly. The awkward silence began to spread outward like a ripple in a pond. People at neighboring tables turned their heads. Hushed whispers ignited, passing from guest to guest. The parents of the groom, William and Patricia, sat at a prime table near the dance floor. Patricia noticed the commotion near the kitchen doors. Her brow furrowed as she saw the empty porcelain dish sitting in front of me. She leaned over to whisper to her husband. The pristine illusion of the Mitchell family was already showing its first cracks. Sylvia had prioritized petty cruelty over strategic optics. She could not resist the urge to twist the knife, even if it meant drawing unwanted attention from her wealthy new-in-laws. This was not an oversight. This was a calculated public execution. Sylvia engineered this moment to break my spirit in front of 300 people. She wanted to prove her undisputed dominance. She wanted to demonstrate that even though I paid for the roof over her head, I was nothing more than an outsider. She intended to humiliate me so profoundly that I would never dare challenge her blackmail threat. I lifted my chin and looked across the expansive ballroom. The head table sat elevated on a small riser, providing a clear view of the entire floor. Sylvia was watching me. She held her champagne flute near her lips. A slow, satisfied smirk stretched across her face. She waited for the tears. She waited for me to crumble. Beside her, Jolene leaned over and whispered something to a bridesmaid. Jolene looked at my empty plate and let out a sharp, visible laugh. They expected me to flush with shame. They anticipated a dramatic exit where I would run out the double doors, hiding my face in disgrace. They thought the immense social pressure would crush my resolve and force me into permanent submission. I did not flinch. My heart rate remained steady. I looked down at the premium cardstock. Not family. It was the most honest statement they had made all year. I reached out and picked up my linen napkin. I folded it with perfect precision, matching the corners exactly. I placed the folded linen next to the empty plate. I did not feel sorrow. I felt a cold, stabilizing rush of adrenaline. I am an auditor. When a hostile entity exposes their true nature, you do not panic. You close the ledger. I raised my eyes from the table. I looked past the shocked guests, past the expensive floral arrangements, and past the laughing bride. I fixed my gaze on the elevated control booth located at the far back wall of the ballroom. Through the tinted glass window, I could see the silhouette of Tyler, the audiovisual technician. He stood by the main soundboard, his hand hovered over the master override switch. We locked eyes across the distance. I gave a single microscopic nod. Tyler saw the signal. His hand moved. The trap I spent months building was now armed. The public execution they planned for me was over. Theirs was about to begin. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone, tapping the metal grill to quiet the room. The time had come for the traditional slideshow. The master of ceremonies steps onto the polished wooden dance floor. He taps the microphone. The sharp thump signals the crowd to settle down. He announces a special presentation curated by the mother of the bride. He calls it a nostalgic journey celebrating a beautiful daughter and a proud father. The overhead chandeliers slowly fade into total darkness. A hush falls over the 300 guests. The heavy anticipation of a touching family moment settles across the tables. I remain in my chair. The empty white dish sits before me. My heart beats in a steady, measured rhythm. A massive canvas descends from the ceiling above the stage. The projector hums to life, casting a brilliant beam of white light across the dim room. The image snaps into sharp focus. The audience expects to see a faded photograph of a toddler taking her first steps. They expect soft, sentimental music. Instead, the high-definition resolution displays the interior of a sterile home workspace. My mahogany desk and locked filing cabinets fill the 15-foot display. The hidden camera footage is pristine. Sylvia steps into the frame on the screen. She is 10 feet tall, looking through my stolen financial records. Tyler, the young technician I hired, follows his instructions flawlessly. He routes the audio feed directly into the primary subwoofers. My mother speaks, and her voice shakes the floorboards. She states clearly that I cannot prove they forged the digital authorization. She boasts that my corporate compliance board will fire me if I report the six-figure fraud. The words echo off the vaulted ceiling, exposing her blackmail scheme to the most influential citizens in the state. The physical reaction inside the venue is immediate and visceral. A woman seated near the front row drops her wine glass. The fragile crystal shatters against the hardwood floor. The sharp crack punctuates the shocking revelation. Waiters freeze in their tracks, holding heavy trays of dessert suspended in midair. Nobody breathes. The elite members of local society stare at the canvas, unable to comprehend the brazen criminality being broadcast before their eyes. The video does not pause. It transitions smoothly to the second recorded segment. Jolene walks into the digital frame holding her iced beverage. The glowing bride sitting at the head table watches her own betrayal unfold in real time. On the screen, Jolene laughs. The sound is sharp and devoid of any humanity. She outlines the temporary nature of the fraudulent loan. She casually explains how she will exploit her new marriage to erase the debt she pinned on my identity. Her voice fills every corner of the room. She details her plan to access the groom family trust account the moment the marriage certificate becomes legally binding. She intends to extract $120,000 to pay off the forged home equity line of credit. The guests listen in horrified silence as she outlines a premeditated plot to embezzle money from her wealthy in-laws. Then she delivers the fatal insult. Jolene calls her new husband stupid. She brags that he never checks his personal ledgers. She smiles at the camera, completely unaware she is documenting her own ruin. Harrison comes from a long line of structural engineers. His family built their generational wealth on precision accountability and absolute trust. They do not tolerate deception. William and Patricia, his parents, are sitting in the front row, listening to their new daughter-in-law call their son an idiot while plotting to steal their capital. Tyler cuts the feed, exactly on cue. The projector clicks off. The massive screen goes black. The venue lights surge back to maximum brightness. The sudden illumination is blinding. The transition from dark deception to harsh reality strips away the entire illusion of the Mitchell family. The country club is dead silent. 300 people sit trapped in a suffocating vacuum of disbelief. The silence presses down on the room heavier than any scream or shouted accusation. I observe the wreckage from my marginalized table near the kitchen. I am a corporate auditor witnessing a bankrupt enterprise finally collapse under the weight of its own liabilities. I do not feel pity. I feel a cold, clinical satisfaction. I look toward the elevated head table. Sylvia stands paralyzed. She still holds her champagne flute, but her knuckles are white. The smug victory she wore like a crown 5 minutes ago is completely gone. Raw, primal terror contorts her features. She realizes her pristine social standing is dead. Jolene looks like her strings have been cut. Her carefully applied makeup suddenly resembles a cheap mask. Her mouth hangs open as she stares at the blank canvas, unable to process the swift and total destruction of her flawless narrative. She spent months planning a luxury spectacle funded by federal wire fraud. She thought she could discard me with an empty porcelain dish and a cruel note. She did not realize I used that isolation to arm the detonator. My father, Richard, grips the edge of the table. His face is a terrible shade of gray. He believed this lavish reception was a generous gift from a wealthy son-in-law. He thought his legacy was secure. Now he understands his wife and youngest daughter stole his equity-forged documents and planned a massive heist to cover their tracks. The shock radiates through his fragile frame. The house of cards he refused to acknowledge has finally burned to the ground. I fold my hands in my lap. The cardstock reading, "Not family," sits perfectly centered on my empty dish. They intended to exile me from their affluent circle. They wanted to prove my insignificance. Instead, I just exiled them from decent society forever. No country club will ever accept their dues. No bank will ever trust their signature. The elite guests seated around them are already inching their chairs backward, physically distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout. The tension in the grand ballroom shifts from the blank projection screen directly to the groom. Everyone watches Harrison. He is the victim of a calculated financial ambush, broadcast for the entire city to see. He sits rigidly beside the woman who just promised to love him, while secretly planning to rob him blind. The suffocating quiet stretches until it feels ready to snap. The next move belongs entirely to the man whose trust fund was targeted for extraction. The heavy silence inside the Charleston Country Club felt thick enough to break glass. 300 guests stopped breathing. The massive projection screen above the dance floor faded to a dull gray, leaving the undeniable truth hanging over the room. I remained in my chair near the kitchen doors. I did not move a muscle. I watched the head table, waiting for the inevitable structural collapse. Harrison sat frozen beside his new bride. He designed commercial bridges for a living. He understood stress fractures, load paths, and failure points better than anyone in the city. He spent his career ensuring foundations rested on solid bedrock. The hidden camera footage just showed him the terrifying sinkhole waiting underneath his own personal life. The quiet stretched tight across the expansive ballroom. Then came the harsh scrape of wood against polished hardwood. Harrison pushed his chair back. He stood up slowly. He did not look angry. He looked like an auditor who had just uncovered a fatal discrepancy in a long-term contract. He looked like a man who had narrowly avoided stepping into an open elevator shaft. Jolene snapped out of her paralysis. The instinct for self-preservation kicked in, overriding her initial shock. She lunged forward, her expensive silk gown catching on the edge of the elevated table. She grabbed Harrison by the forearm, her manicured fingers dug deep into the dark wool of his tuxedo jacket. "Harrison, please," she begged. Her voice cracked, echoing through the silent venue. "That is not real. You have to believe me. It is a fake video." Harrison looked down at her hand. He did not say a word. His expression remained entirely unreadable. Jolene turned her frantic gaze toward the crowd, searching for any available lifeline. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my isolated table in the dark corner. "Idana made it!" she shouted. Her voice climbed into a desperate, shrill register. "She is a corporate hacker. She hates me. She used a computer program to generate our voices. It is a deepfake. She is just a jealous, bitter woman trying to ruin my life because I have you and she has nothing." A few guests shifted in their padded seats. Some turned their heads to stare at me. Most kept their eyes locked on the groom. The deepfake excuse was a pathetic gamble. In this modern era, guilty people often blame artificial intelligence for their worst exposed moments. But the footage I secured was raw and unedited. It carried the undeniable cadence of reality. The ambient hum of my home office air conditioner, the specific rustle of the tax documents, the familiar clink of ice in her plastic cup matching her exact mannerisms. It was far too pristine to be a digital fabrication. Harrison dealt in verified facts. He spent the last 10 months watching Jolene demand endless upgrades to the floral arrangements, the catering menus, and the venue decor. He remembered the vague, evasive answers she provided whenever he inquired about her family finances. He recalled Sylvia changing the subject every time the logistics company was mentioned. All those scattered, isolated puzzle pieces suddenly locked together, forming a flawless picture of premeditated extortion. He looked back at Jolene. He looked at the fake tears streaking her professional makeup. He reached across his body and placed his hand over hers. He did not offer a comforting squeeze. He systematically pried her fingers off his sleeve, peeling her away with clinical precision. Jolene gasped, stepping backward as her hand dropped to her side. Harrison turned his attention to my mother. Sylvia stood rigid, unable to form a single coherent defense. The proud matriarch of the Mitchell family had finally run out of lies. She stared at the wealthy son-in-law she intended to rob, looking like a cornered animal. Harrison adjusted the crisp cuffs of his tuxedo shirt. He met Sylvia in the eyes and delivered his final verdict. He did not raise his voice. He spoke with the chilling authority of a man terminating a toxic merger. "This wedding is officially over." He turned on his heel. He did not wait for a response. He walked down the center steps of the elevated riser and strode directly down the main aisle of the ballroom. His parents, William and Patricia, reacted with the swift, unified efficiency of old money protecting their reputation. They did not cause a scene. They did not offer parting words. Patricia picked up her silver evening bag. William buttoned his suit jacket. They stood up and followed their son toward the exit, leaving their untouched champagne on the table. The departure of the groom shattered the remaining spell holding the room captive. The influential citizens of Charleston realized they were sitting inside a crime scene. A low, chaotic murmur erupted across the 30 tables. Chairs scraped against the floorboards as Harrison's extended relatives and engineering colleagues began to gather their belongings. The mass exodus started slowly and quickly accelerated into a frantic rush for the coat check. Sylvia realized her entire social empire was disintegrating in real time. The panic she tried to suppress exploded into pure, unhinged offense. She could not attack Harrison, so she aimed her wrath at the source of her exposure. She pointed a rigid finger at me across the crowded room. "Security!" she screamed. Her voice tore through the murmuring crowd. "Arrest her right now! She hacked my private records! She ruined this event! Call the police! Get her out of my sight!" 2 country club security guards stationed near the main entrance stepped forward. They wore dark suits and earpieces. They looked confused, scanning the room, unsure of how to handle a dispute among paying clients. They hesitated, glancing toward the venue coordinator for guidance. I did not wait for them to figure out their jurisdiction. The public execution was finished. I had delivered the truth. I stood up from my squeaking chair. I smoothed the front of my charcoal blazer. I reached into my inner pocket and retrieved the thick manila folder I brought from my corporate office. I looked down at the empty white porcelain dish sitting on the silk tablecloth. I looked at the premium cardstock bearing the words, "Not Family." I dropped the manila folder directly onto the empty plate. The brass clasp opened upon impact. A stack of warm printed papers spilled over the rim of the dish. The county property records lay exposed. The forged digital signature block rested face up for anyone to read. The country club wire transfer receipt showing the stolen $120,000 covered the cruel place card. I left the undeniable physical proof of their felony identity theft sitting right where they tried to bury my dignity. I turned my back on table 24. I began the long walk toward the front doors. The remaining guests saw me coming. The elite members of local society parted like the Red Sea. No one said a word to me. No one offered sympathy or condemnation. They simply stepped aside, recognizing a woman who had just burned her own house down to trap the rats inside. I walked down the central aisle, passing the lavish floral arches and the melting custom ice sculpture. I heard Jolene sobbing hysterically near the stage, blaming the audio-visual technician. I heard Sylvia demanding the venue manager call the authorities. Their voices sounded small and distant. I pushed through the heavy glass double doors and stepped into the warm night air. The valet brought my sedan around without me handing him a ticket. He had watched Harrison peel out of the driveway 3 minutes earlier. The staff knew the night was over. I climbed into the driver's seat and closed the door. The sound of the chaotic ballroom vanished, replaced by the quiet hum of my engine. I pulled away from the grand clubhouse, leaving the imported lilies in my rearview mirror. My pulse remained steady. I did not shed a tear. I drove down the winding asphalt path feeling a deep, echoing sense of liberation. I had severed the chains of duty that bound me to their suburban delusion. I had exposed their rot to the very society they worshipped. But the cold logic of my profession reminded me that a cornered predator is the most dangerous kind. Sylvia was humiliated, but she was not yet neutralized. She was currently standing in a ruined ballroom holding a phone. By tomorrow morning, she would launch her retaliatory strike. She would execute the threat she made in the kitchen. She would call my federal licensing board, and she would call the regional police, twisting the narrative to claim I stole the equity and framed her. She would use every remaining ounce of her energy to destroy my career and shift the criminal liability onto my shoulders. I drove toward the city limits. The streetlights cast rhythmic shadows across my dashboard. I could not go home and sleep. I could not wait for Monday morning to defend myself. In corporate warfare, the entity that controls the initial flow of information wins the dispute. If I allowed Sylvia to file the first official complaint, I would spend the next 5 years playing defense in a courtroom trying to clear my name. I reached for my phone resting in the cup holder. I bypassed my contacts and opened my encrypted work portal. I needed to launch a preemptive strike. I needed to move with such overwhelming legal force that Sylvia would be fighting for her freedom before she ever had the chance to dial my compliance board. The emotional fallout was finished. The legal ruthlessness was about to begin. The dashboard clock displays 11:40. I navigate my sedan away from the country club grounds. The tires hum against the dark asphalt. I do not drive toward my quiet suburban neighborhood. A corporate auditor understands that time is the ultimate enemy of justice. In high-stakes financial warfare, the entity that controls the initial flow of information wins the dispute. If I wait until Monday morning to defend myself, Sylvia will execute her blackmail threat. She will call my federal licensing board and spin a tragic narrative, portraying herself as an elderly victim. I will spend 5 years trapped in a courtroom playing defense. I refuse to play defense. I guide my vehicle toward the downtown financial district. The towering glass buildings reflect the amber streetlights. I pull into the subterranean parking garage of a prominent high-rise. My corporate attorney is a man named Grape Vengeance. He manages hostile corporate takeovers and complex liability defense for the elite firms in West Virginia. I pay him a premium retainer specifically for his lack of empathy. He does not sleep when money and reputations are on the line. I called him from the highway. He is waiting in his 14th floor suite. I step out of the elevator. The office corridor is silent. I open the heavy glass door to his firm. The reception area smells of lemon polish and expensive leather. Gregory sits behind a wide oak desk wearing a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looks at me over the rim of his glasses. He does not offer empty sympathy regarding my ruined family event. We deal in facts. I take the leather chair opposite his desk. I open my briefcase. I slide the silver flash drive across the polished wood. I follow it with the printed county property records, the country club wire transfer receipt, and the forged loan documents. Gregory plugs the drive into his secure terminal. He opens the video file. The high-definition footage of my home office plays on his secondary monitor. He listens to my mother detail her extortion scheme. He listens to my sister casually plot to embezzle 6 figures from her wealthy groom. He leans back in his chair and taps his silver pen against the desk blotter. His eyes narrow as he processes the sheer scale of their legal exposure. He looks at me and states that we have a narrow window to dictate the narrative. We must preempt the blackmail. We spend the next 6 hours turning his office into a war room. I do not rely on emotion. I rely on raw data. We compile a minute-by-minute timeline of the identity theft. I log into my secure remote terminal. I extract the digital signature routing logs from the county database. The internet protocol address attached to the fraudulent loan application points directly to my parents' residential router. There is no denying the origin of the forgery. We bundle the forensic evidence, the wire receipts, and the hidden camera footage into a single encrypted packet. The files are organized with surgical precision. At 6 in the morning on Sunday, I send the packet directly to the Executive Oversight Committee at my financial firm. I bypass the standard human resources channels entirely. Submitting a complaint to a low-level manager risks an internal leak. I route the evidence straight to the senior partners. I invoke strict federal whistleblower protection statutes. By exposing the fraud myself, using undeniable physical proof, I shield my corporate license from any retaliatory suspension. The law prohibits an employer from terminating an auditor who reports a verified felony. I transform my status from a potential embezzlement suspect into the primary lead investigator of a sprawling identity theft ring. My career is secured behind an ironclad legal firewall. Protecting my license is only the first step. Gregory pivots to the offensive. He opens a direct communication channel to a contact inside the Regional Federal Bureau of Investigation Cybercrime Division. The theft crosses state lines because the country club processes their event fees through an out-of-state banking consortium. That specific detail elevates the forged home equity loan from a local dispute into a federal wire fraud issue. We submit the evidence to the federal authorities. Gregory files an emergency request for an immediate asset freeze. The family estate was used as illicit collateral in a felony crime. He ensures the federal judge locks the property deed before the sun comes up. Sylvia cannot sell the house. She cannot extract another dime of equity. The financial cage snaps shut around her. I leave the downtown high-rise at 8 in the morning. The sun rises over Charleston, painting the sky in pale shades of orange and gold. The adrenaline that fueled my night begins to fade, replaced by a deep, echoing sense of finality. I drive back to my house. I unlock the front door and step inside. The living room is quiet. The security cameras still rest on the bookshelves, having fulfilled their ultimate purpose. The silence in the house feels different today. It feels earned. It feels clean. I walk into my kitchen. I open a cabinet and retrieve a bottle of dark red wine. I do not care that it is morning. I pour a generous measure into a crystal glass. I set my cell phone on the granite counter. The screen illuminates immediately. The device vibrates against the stone surface. Missed call notifications stack up in rapid succession. The voicemail counter climbs steadily. 10, 20, 30, 40. Every single missed call originates from my mother. I take a slow sip of the wine. The rich flavor grounds me. I tap the screen and access the voicemail inbox. I want to hear the sound of a collapsing empire. I listen to the first recording. Sylvia sounds out of breath. The background noise features slamming doors and frantic shouting. She demands I call her back this instant. She threatens to ruin my life. She insists the video was taken out of context. Her arrogant tone tries to reassert dominance, but the underlying panic betrays her. I delete the message. I click the next recording. The tone shifts drastically. The proud matriarch dissolves into a weeping, frantic woman. She begs for a private conversation. She pleads with me to withdraw the evidence from the public eye. She claims my father is experiencing severe chest pains from the stress. She tries to weaponize his health, using the exact same emotional manipulation she relied on for 3 decades. She thinks I will rush to the hospital. She thinks the invisible utility child will swoop in and fix the disaster. I do not feel guilt. I do not feel the urge to rescue them. I look at the vibrating phone and see a relic of a past life. I pass the power button on the side of the device. The screen goes black. The frantic voices are silenced. I sever the connection, permanently. They spent my entire existence treating me like a disposable asset. They viewed my loyalty as a weakness to be exploited. Now they are learning the true, devastating cost of their investment. I sit on my sofa and enjoy the quiet Sunday morning, watching the sunlight filter through the window blinds. But the peace is only temporary. Monday morning is rapidly approaching. The federal machinery I activated during the night is preparing to grind their pristine social facade into dust. And I am not the only person seeking justice. Harrison is not sitting idle. The wealthy groom they tried to scam is currently meeting with his own elite legal team. He is preparing to unleash a civil avalanche that will leave my parents drowning in consequences they can never escape. Monday morning arrives. The sun rises over the Charleston skyline. I sit at my desk sipping black coffee. My corporate license is secure. The compliance board reviewed my early morning submission and granted me full whistleblower immunity. I am insulated from the fallout. But across town, the shockwaves are just beginning to strike the Mitchell household. Harrison does not wait for apologies. His family operates with the cold efficiency of old money. They hire a bulldog civil litigator. This lawyer specializes in asset recovery and punitive damages. Before Sylvia even finishes her morning tea, a process server knocks on her front door. The server hands her a thick stack of legal documents. The lawsuit is ruthless. Harrison is suing my parents for wedding fraud, emotional distress, and premeditated financial deception. The legal filing details the exact cost of the country club reception. It outlines how my mother and sister conspired to extract a six-figure sum from the groom under false pretenses. The lawsuit demands full restitution for the time and capital Harrison wasted on a fabricated union. Sylvia stares at the paperwork. Her hands shake. She tries to call her own country club friends to seek advice. No one answers. The social execution is already underway. While Sylvia reads the lawsuit, the second blow lands. The regional bank receives my federal wire fraud report. Financial institutions operate on automated risk triggers. The moment the FBI flags the home equity line of credit, the bank software reacts. The lender freezes the account instantly. They issue an emergency demand letter. The bank sends the notice via certified overnight courier. The courier arrives at the estate just an hour after the process server leaves. The letter states the terms of the loan were violated through fraudulent signature capture. The bank demands the immediate repayment of the $120,000. They grant a strict 30-day window. If the balance is not settled, the bank will seize the property and auction the estate. Richard is sitting in his study when Sylvia drops the bank notice on his desk. My father built his logistics company from a single diesel truck. He spent decades managing freight schedules and balancing tight margins. He understands debt. He thought the heavy burdens were lifted. He believed the narrative Sylvia fed him regarding the generous groom. He picks up the demand letter. His eyes scan the black ink. He reads the exact dollar amount. He sees the clause detailing felony forgery. Richard looks up at his wife. The remaining color drains from his face. He asks her where the money went. Sylvia attempts to spin a new web. She tries to minimize the damage. She claims it was a minor accounting error. She insists they can negotiate a payment plan with the regional lender. But the process server documents are still sitting on the kitchen counter. Richard stands up. He walks past her and picks up the civil lawsuit filed by Harrison. He reads the transcript of the hidden camera video quoted in the legal brief. He reads the exact words his youngest daughter used to mock her future husband. He reads the detailed confession of his wife plotting to frame his eldest daughter for embezzlement. The illusion shatters permanently. Richard realizes his wife did not just ruin a wedding, she committed a federal crime. She stole from the child who quietly saved his home, and she bankrupted his remaining equity to buy champagne and silk tablecloths. The stress he tried to avoid for months hits him with the force of a physical blow. He drops the papers. He grips the edge of the granite island, struggling to pull air into his lungs. He realizes he is tied to a sinking ship, and the captain just handed the authorities the drill. Across the city, Jolene is experiencing her own rapid descent. She wakes up in her childhood bedroom. The designer wedding gown hangs in the closet, a useless artifact of a dead future. She picks up her phone. She expects to see text messages from her bridesmaids offering sympathy. She expects her wealthy friends to rally around her and condemn the public video display. Her phone screen is barren. There are no messages of support. Charleston High Society is a small, insulated ecosystem. The elite members protect their own. They despise scandal, especially when the scandal involves stealing from one of their premier families. The country club gossip mill works faster than any news broadcast. Before breakfast, every affluent household in the county knows the bride planned to rob the groom. Jolene attempts to salvage her standing. She drives her car to a high-end boutique downtown. She plans to meet her maid of honor for a scheduled brunch. She thinks she can talk her way out of the disaster. She believes a few fake tears will restore her status. She walks into the boutique cafe. The maid of honor is sitting at a corner table. Jolene approaches, forcing a bright, fragile smile. She reaches out to pull a chair back. The maid of honor stands up. She does not offer a greeting. She picks up her purse and looks at Jolene with pure disgust. She tells Jolene to never contact her again. She turns and walks out of the cafe. The other patrons turn to watch the rejection. Women who praised Jolene 48 hours ago now look at her like she carries a contagious disease. Whispers follow her as she retreats toward the exit. She is no longer the radiant bride marrying into a respected engineering dynasty. She is a common grifter. She is a fraud who got caught on tape plotting a heist. Jolene returns to the estate. She walks through the front door and finds her father packing a small suitcase in the hallway. Richard cannot look at her. He cannot speak to his wife. He zips the bag and walks out to his truck, leaving them alone in the house they stole to finance a lie. The decades of careful social climbing evaporate in 24 hours. The charity luncheons, the exclusive memberships, the carefully curated public image all dissolve into dust. Sylvia and Jolene are trapped inside a foreclosed home, facing a civil lawsuit, a federal investigation, and absolute social exile. The sheer velocity of their ruin strips away their remaining sanity. They have no money left. They have no powerful friends to call. They cannot borrow against the house. They cannot intimidate Harrison. The legal system is closing in from all sides. Desperation breeds dangerous choices. When a predator loses their hunting ground, they do not simply surrender. They lash out at the person who closed the cage. Sylvia looks at the foreclosure notice and the civil lawsuit. She refuses to accept accountability. She twists the blame, assigning every ounce of her failure directly to me. They realize their blackmail strategy failed. They know the compliance board protected my job. The subtle threats of corporate sabotage are useless. They have no leverage left to negotiate. The only remaining option is brute force. Sylvia grabs her car keys. Jolene follows her out the door. They climb into the luxury SUV they can no longer afford. They do not drive to an attorney. They do not drive to the bank to beg for an extension. They aim the vehicle toward my quiet neighborhood. The sun begins to set over the hills, casting long shadows across the pavement. The calculated mind games are over. The polished facade is gone. They are coming to my house with empty bank accounts and nothing left to lose. The final confrontation is no longer about reputations. It is about survival. And they are preparing to cross a line that will force me to trigger the ultimate legal consequence. Tuesday evening descends on my quiet neighborhood. I sit at my kitchen island, reviewing the latest risk assessment files for my firm. The federal machine operates slowly, but the local consequences are moving with blinding speed. The regional lender executed the property lien. My father moved into a cheap motel on the edge of the city. He refused to answer any phone calls from his wife. The estate is empty, except for the two women who orchestrated their own downfall. I take a sip of herbal tea. The silence in my house is a hard-earned sanctuary. I spent 31 years living on the edge of their chaos, cleaning up their messes and absorbing their insults. Now the firewall is up. The perimeter is secure. At exactly 7:15, the perimeter breaches. The screech of rubber tires echoes down my suburban street. I look up from my laptop. A heavy vehicle hops the curb and parks at a jagged angle across my front lawn. It is the luxury SUV. The engine cuts off. Heavy footsteps stomp up my concrete walkway. I do not panic. I simply stand up and walk toward the front entryway. My house is equipped with a high-grade security system. The front door features a reinforced steel frame and impact-resistant glass. A fist pounds against the door. The heavy thud rattles the hinges. I step into the foyer and look through the reinforced window. Sylvia and Jolene stand on my porch. The affluent country club facade is gone. Sylvia wears wrinkled clothes. Her hair is unkempt. The pristine makeup is smeared around her eyes. Jolene looks even worse. She wears stained sweatpants and an oversized shirt. The radiant bride from Saturday night is replaced by a desperate, cornered animal. "Idana, open this door!" Sylvia screams. Her voice is muffled through the fit glass, but the raw panic is unmistakable. I do not touch the deadbolt. I stand in the foyer with my hands folded in front of me. I look at them with the detached observation of an auditor reviewing a bankrupt account. Sylvia slams her palms against the glass. "Please, Idana," she cries. Her voice cracks, shifting from rage into a pathetic, sobbing plea. "You have to stop this. You have to call the federal investigators and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you authorized the loan. Tell them it was a family misunderstanding." I look at her through the glass. She still believes the world operates on her terms. She actually thinks a corporate compliance director can call the Federal Bureau of Investigation and ask them to ignore a felony wire fraud case. She thinks the government is a country club manager she can manipulate with a fake apology. I speak through the heavy door. My voice is calm and measured. The investigation is out of my hands. You committed identity theft. The authorities have the raw data. Sylvia drops to her knees on the concrete porch. The weeping escalates. She presses her face against the glass. "You are destroying our family," she wails. "Your father is sick. His heart cannot take this stress. The bank took our house. He is living in a motel. If he has a heart attack and dies, it will be your fault. His blood will be on your hands." It is the ultimate masterstroke of emotional extortion. For my entire life, she used my father and his fragile health as a weapon to force my compliance. She expects the invisible utility child to break down, open the door, and sacrifice herself to save the patriarch. I look down at the woman kneeling on my porch. I do not feel a shred of guilt. "You destroyed the family when you stole my social security number," I reply. "You gambled his house for a silk dress. Do not project your crimes onto me." The guilt trip fails. Sylvia realizes the old tactics hold zero power. The weeping stops instantly. The fake sorrow evaporates, replaced by a venomous, seething hatred. She stands up, her face twisted in rage. "You ungrateful parasite," she spits. "We fed you. We raised you. You owe us everything. I will make sure you burn for this." She raises her fist to pound on the door again, but Jolene pushes her out of the way. Jolene is vibrating with pure, unhinged fury. Her wealthy groom abandoned her. Her high society friends blocked her number. She has no future and no money. She blames me for extinguishing the lavish life she thought she deserved. Jolene does not yell. She turns around and walks toward my flower beds. I have a heavy cast iron bird bath sitting near the edge of the porch. It weighs at least 30 pounds. Jolene grabs the heavy iron basin. She grunts, lifting the metal object above her shoulder. Her eyes lock onto mine through the glass. She looks feral. She swings the iron basin directly at the center of my front door. The impact sounds like a gunshot. The metal strikes the reinforced window. The glass does not shatter, but a web of deep white cracks spiderwebs across the pane. The loud crash echoes through the quiet suburban neighborhood. Jolene screams in frustration. She lifts the heavy iron ornament and strikes the door a second time. More cracks splinter across the window. She is trying to physically break into my home. She wants to tear me apart with her bare hands. I do not flinch. I do not step backward. I reach over to the alarm control panel mounted on the wall next to the doorframe. I lift the plastic cover. I press the red emergency panic button. A silent signal transmits instantly to the local police dispatch. Jolene swings the iron bird bath a third time. The outer layer of the glass fractures, raining small shards onto the welcome mat. Sylvia stands behind her, cheering her on, encouraging the destruction. They are so consumed by their own rage, they fail to notice the flashing blue and red lights turning onto my street. The response time is exactly 4 minutes. 2 police cruisers screech to a halt behind a luxury SUV. 4 uniformed officers jump out of their vehicles. They draw their weapons and sprint up the driveway. They see 2 women actively smashing their way into a residential property.
"Drop the weapon!"
An officer shouts. His voice carries the sharp, unmistakable authority of law enforcement. Jolene freezes. The heavy cast iron basin slips from her hands and crashes onto the concrete porch. Sylvia turns around, gasping, as she sees the drawn firearms.
"Put your hands behind your back," the officer commands. "Get on the ground."
Sylvia attempts to play the victim one final time. She raises her hands defensively. "Officer, you do not understand," she cries. "That is my daughter inside. She stole our money. We are just trying to talk to her. This is a family matter." The police do not care about her country club etiquette. They do not care about her fabricated narrative. They see a smashed door and a hostile intruder. An officer grabs Sylvia by the shoulder and forces her against the brick wall. The cold metal handcuffs click securely around her wrists. Another officer tackles Jolene to the ground, pressing her face into the shattered glass on the welcome mat. He pulls her arms behind her back and secures the cuffs. I unlock the deadbolt and pull the damaged door open. The night air rushes into the foyer. "Are you unharmed, ma'am?" the lead officer asks. He keeps a firm grip on Sylvia. "I am fine," I reply. My voice is steady and calm. These women are trespassing on my property. They attempted to break into my home. I have the entire incident recorded on my external security cameras. Sylvia struggles against the officer. Her face is red and streaked with mascara. "You are a monster, Idana," she screams. "You belong in hell for what you are doing to your own mother." Jolene thrashes on the ground, crying uncontrollably. Her sweatpants are covered in dirt and broken glass. She begs the officers to let her go, claiming she is a victim of a deepfake conspiracy. The officers ignore her rambling excuses. They pull her to her feet and march her toward the back of the patrol car. I stand on my porch and watch them get shoved into the back seats of the police cruisers. The doors slam shut. The flashing blue and red lights illuminate my driveway, casting long shadows across my damaged front door. This is the first true, ironclad boundary I have ever enforced. For decades, they crossed every line, violated every space, and demanded my submission. They believed they could break down my door and force me to fix their mistakes. The handcuffs prove that the era of the utility child is dead. The officers ask me if I want to press formal charges for the property damage and the attempted break-in. I look at the shattered glass on my porch. I look at the two women sitting in the back of the squad cars. Yes, I state clearly. I want to press every available charge. The police cruisers back out of my driveway and disappear down the dark street. The quiet returns to my neighborhood. I step back inside my house and lock the damaged door. The local arrest for vandalism and trespassing is a satisfying consequence. It forces them to spend the night in a concrete holding cell sitting on a metal bench instead of sleeping on expensive silk sheets. But the local police report serves a much larger strategic purpose in my corporate war. The outburst at my home is the final piece of evidence the federal authorities need. The FBI monitors suspect behavior closely. When the lead cybercrime investigator sees the police report detailing how the primary suspects attempted to physically attack the whistleblower, the federal case elevates to maximum priority. Sylvia and Jolene think the worst part of their week is sitting in a local jail cell for breaking a window. They have no idea that the local arrest just triggered the final sequence of their ruin. The federal machine is done collecting evidence. The indictments are printed. The courtroom is waiting. The local holding cell offered a cold metal bench and a thin wool blanket. My mother and sister spent Tuesday night shivering in municipal custody, surrounded by peeling paint and concrete walls. They expected to post bail by sunrise. They anticipated calling a favored defense lawyer to brush away the vandalism charges with a polite apology and a small fine. They did not understand the gears grinding against them in the dark. Wednesday morning arrived. A desk sergeant unlocked their cell door. Sylvia adjusted her ruined silk blouse, preparing to walk into the lobby and reclaim her assumed authority. She never reached the front desk. Two agents wearing dark suits intercepted them in the narrow precinct hallway. They flashed official federal badges. They read a new set of Miranda rights. The local trespassing charge was a mere footnote in a much larger narrative. The agents formally indicted Sylvia and Jolene on 2 counts of felony wire fraud and 1 count of aggravated identity theft. The heavy steel handcuffs snapped back onto their wrists, restricting their movement. The federal penal system does not care about high society pedigree or country club memberships. The reality of federal prosecution carries a distinct chilling weight. A week later, I sat in the polished conference room of my attorney, Grape Vengeance. Across the mahogany table sat the defense lawyer my parents scrambled to hire on credit. The man looked exhausted, carrying a worn leather briefcase. He slid a crisp white document across the wood. It was a settlement offer. The defense proposed a private plea arrangement. Sylvia offered to liquidate her remaining jewelry and retirement accounts to repay the regional lender. In exchange, she demanded a strict non-disclosure agreement. She wanted me to sign a contract swearing I would never speak of the forged loan again. She sought to seal the court records to protect her precious reputation from public scrutiny. I looked at the printed contract. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinner where they mocked my silent sacrifice. I remembered the empty porcelain dish waiting for me at the wedding reception. I pushed the paper back across the table. I did not pick up a pen. I refuse, I stated. My voice held zero hesitation. We are going to trial. I want every single piece of evidence entered into the public record. The defense lawyer wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. He packed his briefcase and left the room without arguing. He knew his clients were doomed. The federal courthouse in Charleston features towering marble columns and heavy oak benches. The gallery filled quickly on the first morning of the trial. The local elite, the same affluent citizens who drank premium champagne at the wedding reception, now packed the spectator rows. They arrived to watch a spectacular social execution. I sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecution table. I wore a tailored navy suit. I watched Sylvia and Jolene enter the courtroom. They looked hollow. The designer gowns were replaced by drab conservative pantsuits. The arrogance that defined their existence was stripped away, revealing nothing but pure terror. The prosecution built an impenetrable wall of facts. They displayed the hidden camera footage on a large digital monitor facing the jury box. The 12 jurors watched my mother confess to the extortion scheme. They listened to my sister outline her plan to embezzle funds from her wealthy groom. The raw, unfiltered truth echoed off the mahogany walls. The defense tried to object, claiming the recording violated privacy laws. The judge overruled them instantly, citing the security statutes protecting a private domicile. The digital footprint sealed the trap. The prosecution brought a forensic cyber analyst to the witness stand. The expert mapped the Internet protocol address used to forge my signature on the home equity line of credit. The data traced directly back to the router inside my parents' living room. The timestamp matched the exact hour Sylvia requested I visit the estate to fix a supposed internet outage. The lie was exposed in stark numerical detail. The most devastating blow arrived on the third day of the proceedings. The prosecution called Harrison to the stand. The former groom walked past the defense table without glancing at his former bride. He wore a sharp, gray suit. He took the oath and sat in the witness chair. He looked like an executive reviewing a toxic asset. The prosecutor asked him to describe the wedding finances. Harrison spoke with a calm, measured cadence. He detailed how Jolene manipulated his trust from the very beginning. He explained her constant demands for escalating luxury. He recounted the precise moment the video played at the reception, shattering his reality. Harrison did not shout. He did not cry. He used cold financial terminology to dissect Jolene. He called her actions a predatory extraction of wealth. He testified that she lied about the logistics company failing and specifically targeted his generational trust fund to erase her own debts. Jolene sat at the defense table staring at her lap. Her shoulders shook. She realized the man she intended to rob viewed her as a repulsive liability. His testimony painted her not as a misguided daughter, but as a calculating con artist. While the trial dismantled my mother and sister, another tragedy played out in the gallery. My father, Richard, sat 3 rows behind me. He looked a decade older. His freight business was officially dead. The commercial lenders seized his remaining diesel trucks to cover unpaid invoices. During a brief afternoon recess, I walked into the marble hallway. I saw Richard standing near the water fountain. He was holding a manila envelope. His hands trembled as he pulled a pen from his pocket. He was signing divorce papers. The man who spent 30 years enabling Sylvia finally reached his breaking point. He severed the marital contract to distance himself from her felony convictions. But the divorce did not save him from the financial ruin she engineered. The defense attorneys required a hefty retainer to fight the federal charges. Because their primary bank accounts were frozen, the lawyers placed a secondary lien on the family estate. The regional bank forced a rapid auction of the property. The proceeds went toward paying the legal fees for the women who forged my name. Richard lost his home, his business, and his marriage, all because he chose to believe a convenient lie over a hard truth. He walked out of the courthouse a penniless, broken man. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. The rapid decision signaled a foregone conclusion. The judge ordered everyone to rise. The foreperson read the verdict out loud. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing took place a month later. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for strict accountability, stared down from the elevated bench. She looked at Sylvia and Jolene with profound disgust. The judge delivered her ruling. She stated that exploiting a familial bond for financial gain represents the lowest form of human greed. She noted that stealing a child's identity to fund a superficial social event showed a severe lack of rehabilitation potential. She slammed her wooden gavel against the sounding block. Sylvia received a sentence of 48 months in a federal correctional facility. Jolene received 36 months. The judge did not stop at prison time. She imposed steep restitution fines, ensuring that upon their eventual release, a percentage of every paycheck they ever earned would be garnished to repay the regional lender. Federal marshals stepped forward. They instructed my mother and sister to stand. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the quiet courtroom. I watched them get escorted through the side door. Sylvia looked back at me one final time. Her eyes held a mixture of disbelief and lingering resentment. She still could not fathom that the quiet utility child outsmarted her. I did not offer a farewell glance. I stood up, buttoned my navy jacket, and walked out of the gallery. The paperwork they forged to finance a single evening of unearned luxury became the exact documentation used to lock them in a concrete cell. They built an intricate cage of lies, and I simply handed the authorities the key. The federal trial concluded with the gavel slamming down on 2 definitive guilty verdicts. But my life did not pause for celebratory toasts or emotional reflections. On Monday morning, I walked back through the glass doors of my financial firm. The quiet whispers and speculative glances that followed my suspension weeks earlier were entirely gone. The executive partners had received the official exoneration letter from the Federal Compliance Board detailing my instrumental role as the primary whistleblower in a major corporate fraud investigation. Richard, the senior vice president, called me into his corner office before the morning markets opened. He did not offer stiff corporate platitudes or hollow corporate handshakes. He slid a formal promotion agreement across his mahogany desk. The firm recognized my ability to navigate high-stakes crisis management and systemic risk with absolute precision. They promoted me to Senior Vice President of Global Compliance. My salary doubled. My authority expanded across 3 regional offices. While my mother and sister traded their designer wardrobes for institutional orange jumpsuits, I stepped into a position of absolute corporate power and unassailable professional respect. A month after the sentencing, the legal fallout reached its final physical milestone. The West Virginia estate where I grew up, the house my father built and my mother used as a weapon of emotional control, was officially placed on the public auction block by the regional lender. The property liens and the massive legal fees accumulated during the trial left the estate completely underwater. The county scheduled the sheriff's sale for a damp Friday morning on the courthouse steps. I drove downtown and parked my sedan across the street. I stood on the wet concrete holding a cashier check issued by my firm. A handful of local real estate speculators gathered in the mist, waiting for the auctioneer to begin. No one recognized me in my sharp black wool coat and dark sunglasses. The auctioneer stepped onto the stone landing and began rattling off property descriptions with bored, mechanical speed. When he reached the address of my childhood home, the opening bid dropped low. The liens and secondary judgments scared off retail buyers. No one wanted a property burdened by federal forfeiture records and a toxic history. I raised my hand. I stated a clean cash figure. The auctioneer called out the numbers 3 times. The gavel struck the wood. I purchased the estate that had enslaved my youth for a fraction of its market value. I bought my own history back for pennies on the dollar. I did not keep the keys. I had zero desire to step foot inside those rooms or walk down the hallway where my mother dictated the rules of conditional affection. I drove out to the estate the very next afternoon. I parked my car in the gravel driveway and stared at the brown siding and the chain-link fence. The place looked smaller than it did when I was a child. I did not reminisce or shed a sentimental tear. I pulled my phone from my pocket and made a single phone call. 2 hours later, a heavy commercial demolition excavator rolled down the street, its diesel engine roaring loudly in the quiet neighborhood. I hired a local contractor to clear the land completely. I stood on the overgrown grass and watched the steel bucket crash through the living room window. I watched the roof collapse inwards, sending a massive plume of dust into the autumn air. The kitchen where my mother blackmailed me and the dining room where I sat in silence while my sister stole my credit were reduced to a pile of splintered wood and crushed drywall. Hauling away the debris took 3 days of continuous labor. Once the lot was completely empty, I contacted the commercial developer who had been quietly buying up commercial parcels near the new highway expansion. They had been trying to acquire that specific acreage for years to secure frontage access. We negotiated the terms in a single afternoon. I sold the cleared land to the developer for a massive cash profit. The initial investment I made to purchase the property at the sheriff's sale multiplied exponentially. The house that was used as collateral to trap me ultimately funded my permanent financial independence. Months passed into a quiet, orderly routine. I moved into a modern penthouse apartment overlooking the Charleston skyline. My new office on the 20th floor offered a panoramic view of the river and the financial district. I spent my days managing global portfolios and ensuring corporate integrity, leaving the trauma of my past firmly locked behind professional boundaries. Then, one afternoon, the silence of my pristine corporate office was broken. My desk phone emitted a sharp electronic chime. I looked down at the digital display. It did not show a local client or an executive partner. It displayed an automated incoming call notification from a federal correctional facility. A pre-recorded mechanical voice announced a collect call from an inmate. The system asked if I wished to accept the charges and connect the line. I knew exactly who was sitting on the other end of that connection. I knew whose voice would fill the static if I pressed the flashing button. I thought back to the Charleston Country Club. I remembered the white lilies, the arrogant smirks, the expensive champagne, and the pristine, empty white porcelain dish placed in front of my chair. I remembered the cardstock printed with two cold words: not family. They spent decades trying to render me invisible, cutting me out of their narrative and treating my existence as a disposable expense. Now they were sitting behind concrete walls, with no money, no status, and no one left to exploit. My finger hovered over the receiver. The phone continued to vibrate against the wood, the electronic chime demanding an answer. I did not pick up the handset. I did not press mute. I simply leaned back in my leather chair and watched the glowing light flash. I let it ring. I let it ring continuously until the automated system timed out and the line went dead. The screen returned to dark stillness. I picked up my pen and went back to reviewing the active compliance ledgers. The account was settled. The balance was zero. The ledger was permanently closed.